In this video, we'll cover all of the tools that you'll need to get started, 2 different variations on making this chain, and then conclude with some ideas for how you could incorporate these chains into some of your pieces. This technique is quite simple, and it really doesn't require very many tools. It's a great way to display your pieces on something one of a kind. The tools that we'll need for this project are your pliers and cutters, a ruler, an Allen key, and a draw plate. Now when I'm working on these chains, I usually work quite small, so I use this 4mm Allen key. For the sake of the video, I've gone up both in the size for wire and in the size of the Allen key to make it a little bit easier for you to see. So this is an 8mm Allen key. For the draw plate, it's not really necessary to purchase one like I have here, and in fact, I'm not very pleased with the quality of this draw plate. I'll go over later on in the video how it's easy enough to make your own using graduated drill bits and a spare piece of wood. When I'm working on these chains, I usually use 30, 28, or 26 gauge round wire, depending on the width of the chain that I'm looking for. I decided to use 24 gauge round for this video, just to make it a little bit bigger and a little easier for you to see what I'm doing. I usually cut my wire in 2-foot segments to use while weaving these chains. For this video, I've shortened it to 1 foot, just to kind of cut out a little bit of the extra length that I don't really need for this video. Let's get started on the chain. The first step is to create what I call the flower. I'm going to take my wire directly from the spool, I don't have a specific length, and I'm going to wrap around my ruler 6 times. So that when I'm done, there should be 6 individual crossings on this side of the ruler. Next, I'm going to slide those loops off of the ruler, and I'm going to pass through with both wires. And then twist them together just to keep them neat. So I've got 6 little loops. Taking the end that I've wrapped around, I'm going to pinch them together and then fold the petals of the flower out. Something like that. From here, I'm going to fold the petals down around over the top of my Allen key. I like to use the Allen key because it gives me kind of these guides where the petals can sit evenly on the flat sides of the Allen key. That way, right off the bat, they're more or less equally spaced. To make it a little bit easier on myself, I usually like to take a piece of masking tape just to hold everything in place while I start the chain. I usually like to work in a counterclockwise direction, spiraling down and around the Allen key as I work. To start it, I'm going to take my first section of 24 gauge round, putting it through the loops of the petals, back the opposite direction from the way I'm weaving, and down across itself. From here, I'm going to pass through the next series of loops and repeat that same process all the way around the Allen key. When I reach the point where I've passed through each of the petals one time, creating the same loop pattern all the way through, I'm going to step underneath the petal. There we go. Underneath the right petal and through the left petal, passing in between the petal in our weave, pulling it through to start the next layer down. I find that it's helpful at this point to rotate your petals a few degrees so that now my loops are sitting on the flat side of the Allen key. Makes it really easy to pass the wire underneath for each loop as you go through the weave. From here, the pattern pretty much continues the same way. You're going to go ahead and from right to left, underneath the loop from the level above, and keep passing around the Allen key in a counterclockwise direction. I like to use the flat sides of the Allen key to let me know if I'm pulling it evenly. And when you pass this through the draw plate, it'll even out all of your loops, but it helps to keep things nice and organized as you're working through. I went ahead and wrapped the rest of our 24 gauge through. Now I'll show you how to connect the next piece of wire on. First, we're carefully going to slide the whole thing off of our Allen key. I'm going to take my pliers and bend that wire ending up into the center of the chain. Carefully slide our Allen key back in. When you pull the chain through the draw plate, that little ending will be safely tucked inside the chain. To connect our next piece of wire, I'm going to go ahead and take that length and I'm going to go underneath the loop, but over the top of where we just bent that piece down. Give yourself about 1/4 to 1/2 inch of space, depending on the size of wire you're using. Bend it down in a loop over the top of that. From here, you can go ahead and weave through the rest of the chain. That same pattern going underneath our loops, back over the opposite direction of our weave, repeating under the next loop. I went ahead and finished weaving that wire through the chain. I'm going to show you how to connect the next wire one more time, and then we're going to go over a different variation of this chain. So first, we're carefully going to slide our Allen key out of the chain, bend our wire ending into the center of the chain, and slide our key back in. We're going to take our next wire under the loop, but through the gap between the bend of the wire and the loop, leaving about 1/2 inch of space, and pulling it in a nice tight little loop around that gap. Now up till this point, we've been working on what's called a single knit weave. There's a lot more space between each of the little loops. I'll show you what it looks like when it's pulled through the draw plate. Here's one that I went ahead and pulled through using a single knit weave. I pulled this one through to about 2.5 millimeters, and depending on your design you may not need to pull it quite so small, but I'm not really crazy about how much space there is between the wires when you do pull it so small. For this, I like to use something called the double knit weave. Let's go over that now. To start the double knit weave, I usually like to do one short length of wire around the petals using the single knit weave first, just to establish the weave of the chain without using too much wire. The process is almost the same, except instead of passing underneath the bottommost loop, you'll go up one loop to the second from the bottommost loop, passing through the same way that you've done this whole time, and moving on to the next one. I went ahead and finished the first loop around our Allen key with the double knit. And the process pretty much continues all the rest of the way through the length of the wire, going up one each time and pulling it through. The finished chain will have much less negative space, so it'll look a little bit more cohesive. Depending on what you're going for with the piece, this is usually my favorite way to make these chains. You can see that the amount of negative space for the double knit is significantly less than for the single knit. Here's what some of those chains look like when they're pulled through the draw plate. Here's one that I'm working on for a project now using 30 gauge round in the double knit. Here's a close-up of two chains that I pulled using 28 gauge round. The one on the left is the double knit, and the right is the single knit. The double knit just looks much neater at this size. The double knit process is much slower and uses a significant amount more materials. Right now, this 30 gauge round one that I'm working on is about 18 inches long and used about 50 feet of wire so far. This double knit is 24 inches long using 28 gauge round. I used 48 feet of sterling silver wire to make this chain. While it is pretty time consuming and uses a ton of materials, I really like the way that these chains look. Let's go ahead and finish this one up for now. I'm going to go ahead and pull it through the draw plate as is. When you're working on a chain, you never want to pull it through the draw plate all the way to the end. If you do, you won't be able to continue to add wire to the chain as you go. I usually like to leave about an inch to a half an inch unpulled through the draw plate, just so I can continue to add wire, but I know just how much length I've achieved so far. For now, with this one, I'm just going to go ahead and pull it all the way through. I'm not really concerned about continuing to add to this one. The first step would be just like we've done in the past, to carefully slide your chain off, trim to about between a quarter and a half inch, and tuck your wire ending into the chain. From here, I'm going to go ahead and pull the tape off. Now we're ready to start pulling our chain through the draw plate. I'm using this cheap plastic one for now, but one of the things that I noticed was that as I was working in the smaller sizes, the metal just burred the hole larger instead of pulling the chain tighter. So if you don't have one of these, it's easy enough to make your own that will be a little bit more durable using a piece of wood and then graduated drill bits. Since I used the larger holes with the plastic plate, I've only redone the smaller holes in this piece of wood. The process itself is really simple. Go ahead and pull through, starting at the largest and working your way down to the smallest. As you're pulling through one size smaller at a time, your weave will actually start to even out. So even if your coils weren't exactly the same size with each one, the draw plate will start to even everything out as you go. So far I've pulled down to about 8 millimeters. As you get smaller, it gets much more difficult to pull through as you go. I usually like to take my nylon tips and grab the end of where our pedals were to help the chain through as you go. That way, using the nylons, these won't break on you. I've pulled our chain down to about 6 millimeters. You can see that the single knit is really flexible, and this double is very stiff. It's something to keep in mind while you're working on your own designs. When you reach the desired width for your chain, you can actually go ahead and snip off the pedal section. And pull all of those little pedal endings off of the chain. And here we have about 2 inches of finished chain, ready for the next step. Pulling the chain through that draw plate evened out all of my loops, even though I wasn't paying incredibly close attention as I was weaving around the Allen key. From this point, it's up to you to decide how to finish the chain. If you wanted it to be wearable as a necklace or a bracelet, you might want to add some end caps to it. You could wire wrap your own design, or if you're proficient with a torch, you could quickly solder on some end caps to cover the endings of the chain. Another option that I always thought would be really cool, but I've never had the time to try, was using a section of Viking knit as a coil in one of your wire-wrapped pendants. I really love the texture of the double knit especially, and it could be really cool to be used in a piece. Another potential use for Viking knit could be as a setting. If you look down the barrel, there's just enough open space where you could potentially tuck some stone beads into the center of the chain. With the spacing in the single knit, it might look really cool to have a section of Viking knit with stone beads on the center. As always, I really value your feedback. I'd love to hear what you think about this video in the comment sections below. If you use Viking knit in any of your pieces, I'd love to take a look at them. Shoot me a message on Instagram and show me what you've been working on. The link for my Instagram is in the description of this video below. To see more of my work and to see what I have available for sale, check out the link to my website in the description below. And as always, special thank you shout out to all of my patrons for supporting the channel. If you're interested in supporting what I do here, follow the link to my Patreon in the description of this video.